Every great company starts with someone who says, there's gotta be a better way. This is the show for founders who go against all odds and push through when the odds say quit. The leaders who trade certainty for the pursuit of their vision and build something remarkable. This is Audacity of Entrepreneurs, where serial entrepreneurs, exited founders, executives, and their advisors have unfiltered conversations about what it really takes to build a company. Here is your host, Nick Uresin.
Welcome to another episode of Audacity of Entrepreneurs. Today, my guest is someone that is many things. So she's, first of all, a published author, a professionally trained singer. She has PhD in life, as she puts it, with a lot of twists and turns, and her knowledge comes from her life university study and her diploma and thesis. But suffice it to say that what she teaches today is well proven, that came out of her own experience. She is the founder of Fear Intelligence, which provides transformational leadership skills to those in leadership roles. And when she's not working, she loves gardening, work, and her family. So with that, everybody, meet my guest, Jacqueline Wales. Welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Well, thank you for having me, Nick. It's my pleasure.
Oh, it's always great to have people like you. And you know what I love about these conversations? It's the stories. Because the entrepreneurial, yes, they teach entrepreneurship in schools, but you don't teach entrepreneurship experience. You gain it. You have to have the scars, right?
Absolutely.
So
yes.
this show is all about those stories. So everybody listening, so I want you to stay tuned at all times, but stay focused, because today we're going to talk about the operating system for transformational leadership. And as Jacqueline puts it, it's the fear framework that starts with face, then explore, and act, and then rise. So that's what fear stands for. And of course, you're going to hear from Jacqueline every one of these pieces, and we're going to dig into it. And by the time you finish listening, you will have a pretty good idea, and you can go apply it so that you can transform your leadership skills. But first, Jacqueline, tell us about your bankruptcy and the birth of Fear Intelligence.
Well, the
And then
bankruptcy.
get
The bankruptcy. Interesting. You should start with that story. This is the COVID years. And for people who are solopreneurs like me, a lot of the business just vanished. And people who would normally want to show up, everybody hunkered down because there was no sense of where this was all going. Well, I decided to be an entrepreneur and take the risks and put myself into redevelopment. I looked at all the content that I had and realized that I needed to hire someone who really was talented to take a lot of this content and create online programs for them. Previously, I'd offered it just simply through digital methodology. I mean, it'd been going for years. I had a binder sitting on my top shelf, and a good friend who knew the work said to me, "What are you doing with that thing? And it's really an important piece of work, and I don't think you're really taking care of it." And I was like, "You're absolutely correct." So I turned that into a 6-month program, but I hired an organizational development person, someone who was a learning architect, to take the materials and build it out on a platform called Rise, which is part of Articulate 360. And I then, at that point in time, I also started building other types of programs. This is before AI, so it wasn't AI generated stuff. This was all through the research and other stuff. So bit by bit, I'm spending money. I get an SBA loan. The credit card debts are mounting up because you've got, expenses that you got to pay for, including hiring people to help you. Because here's the other thing that I know for sure. If you can't do it, you need to hire people who are smarter than you to do it for you. And that's a mistake that entrepreneurs make, frankly, because, and I did it too for years, I'll muscle my way through, I'll figure it out. But in the end, you're not getting the traction that you want. So, anyways, I ended up building these 4 programs. One was on what I call transformational strategies for success. Then there was one for communication, one for trust, and another one called From Chaos to Clarity, which was the other online program. Very detailed, lots of videos, quizzes, reflection points, very unique approach to the learning process for individuals who are really interested in building their self-awareness, building their skills of communication and trust, and being able to take that into the workplace. So it costs a lot of money to and of course, it was all on credit cards. And at a certain point, I suddenly looked at the amount of debt that was sitting there, and I was like, there's no way in hell I'm going to spend the next 5 to 10 years paying this shit back. So what are we going to do? Well, you're going to go declare bankruptcy. Now, here's the thing about bankruptcy. A lot of people have shame around this. If you're a business person, it's a smart move. It's a smart move because it clears the decks for being able to take the next big step. Well, within a year, I was back up to a 6-figure income again, working for companies who were using those programs to train their managers to become better leaders, and or leaders who were needed to become better leaders through the use of these programs. And I ended up spending 18 months with one particular company doing this transformational work. And it set the stage for what then became Fear Intelligence as I move forward. Because up until then, I had written 2 books on fear, The Fearless Factor and The Fearless Factor at Work. They both had a kind of similar theme, but a different focus. First one was primarily for women. The second one was really designed for managers who lacked self-awareness. And they were relatively successful. I've self-published all my books simply because I don't want to deal with publishing houses. They're a pain in the ass. And they don't give you much money for what you're doing. So you do it yourself. So there's a whole other story on self-publishing and what we do with our content and knowledge. So that was really the bankruptcy story. And I felt like that was really the good thing to do. I don't want to do it again, frankly. I'm happy to keep things on even keel, but should it ever happen again, I'm okay paying for a bankruptcy lawyer to go deal with it. I mean, I heard somebody on a bankruptcy call that had done this 3 times, and I'm like, how do you do that 3 times? It's like, you know what you're getting into every time. So, where's the disconnect for you? But anyways, in my case, once is enough, and that's pretty good with me. So meanwhile, it's been continuing from there.
So I want to share with you a couple of things. So one day I'm big into interviews, panels, talking to people, learning, and I was listening to this guy who was a historian. It was about America in general. What is the difference between America and other countries? And he said America is about second chances. He said people came here because they wanted a second chance in life. They were being persecuted, and they envisioned a place to restart, new beginnings. That's what America is about. And he said, in fact, you can see that in every piece of your life experience in America. For example, he said, and this, I wasn't born in this country, so I know exactly. In other countries, underdeveloped countries especially, you cannot declare bankruptcy and start over as easily as you can in America. And he says, here we believe in second chances, so we make it easy so you can go bankrupt and then bounce back and become wildly successful if you want. Our laws allow that. So here you are. You have the perfect example
of what that looks like. And both of us are immigrants. I was born in Scotland. And
really?
Where were you born?
Turkey.
In Turkey. Okay. Yeah, so, I've been to Turkey. It's a beautiful country.
Yeah. Turkey is, believe it or not, Turks are a very interesting. We are a race. Did you know that Turks are a race?
I can believe it because of the influences of all the different countries around you, and the history of Turkey. I mean, you had a lot of invasions too along the way, so there's all of that. I mean, it's a rich history. I mean, I come from Scotland, which has associations with France and England and all of that stuff that goes with it, but the truth of the matter is that as an immigrant, when you come into this country, you come into this country because you want to do better, because you want a better life. And of course, it's not always clear in the beginning. It certainly wasn't in my case that that's what was going to happen. If anybody had told me back then, this is 1978, 79, when I first came to the United States, if somebody had told me then what I know now, I would have said, yeah, you're kind of a little mental because there's no way in hell that I was going to do this. I didn't have that vision. It took a long time for that vision to evolve into what
Right.
I'm doing today. And I think that's another piece of it. Some people do come in with, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I want, and I'm going to go for it. But many people come in and they're like, well, I'm here, but sure what I'm going to be doing with the rest of my life while I'm here, but this is a better environment than what I left. And for me, it was a working class background in Scotland. And at the time, there was still a very tiered structure to the society. If you know anything about the UK, there's if you're working class back then, you were still classified as less than. And a piece of me knew and understood that that was not going to be my pathway, because if I had stayed where I was born, I was only expected to go into a factory and work, get married, have kids, and die
Right.
there. That was it. And I knew from a very early age that hell no, that is not the life I'm choosing. But I made a lot of tragic mistakes along the way too that added up over the years until you finally wake up one day and you go, well, maybe I need to do this a little bit differently. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah. It's true. You're so right. It's a lot of people are here. They don't really know what to do. So it takes them a while to figure out. Some people are here because of the benefits of being here. I mean, it's you cannot deny that. And but there is another one that is the group of people that I think will benefit from this podcast and other sources, where they know what to do, but they just don't know how to implement it, because you, right, that also takes time, and it takes 20, 30 years to figure out.
I mean, people say to me all the time, and I get this on podcasts always, it's like, how did you come to this business of fear? And I go, yeah, go live it. And you figure out where it limits your expression of self and how it limits your life in so many ways. And fear was a great driver for me. And people often say to me in my workshops on fear intelligence, isn't fear a motivating force? And I go, yes, but only if you understand it as such.
Yeah.
But most people see it as a limitation, not as a motivator. The motivator might be, I can't fail, or I need to succeed, or I need to make money, and therefore I'm going to push through whatever discomfort I'm feeling and whatever else is going on. I'm going to exclude it all from my life, and I'm just going to drive all the way through. The question on that one is, what is that costing you?
Yeah.
And I guarantee you it's costing you a hell of a lot more than you're actually giving me credit for. But you have to understand this is part of the journey too.
Yeah. So we have a saying, Jacqueline, in my business organization, and people say, "Oh, I've been doing this way, that way, and I know what to do." And at the same time, they are at the table because they have a problem. So you listen and listen and listen, and then you ask a very simple question: how's that working for you? So it kind of brings it in perspective. So, okay. So the fear, first of all, let's clarify this. We're not talking about the feeling, being fearful. Fear is an acronym, it's a methodology. So let's dissect this But obviously, fear is also a huge driver. It's part of this, but it's not just the feeling we're talking about. We're talking about an
So
operating
let's,
system,
so
as you
let's
put it.
start with the fundamentals of it. Fear is an emotion. It is a feeling. It's an emotion. It's an emotion that is created by our primitive response to a threat. Whenever there's a perceived threat, we're going to go into the emotion of fear. But like all emotions, there needs to be a story attached to it. And that's where the face piece comes in, number one. Because when we can understand fear as data, as information, what story are you telling yourself around whatever that might be? Then you have to analyze it. Of course, we're going to go into the full framework program, but the facing of this emotion, the facing of the stories that this emotion elicits becomes a really important part of the journey to understand it. Because too many times we're driven by thinking and behavior that is not only decades old, but is intergenerational. We weren't born with fear. We don't come into the world as a baby with fear, even although we're being squeezed through this very narrow passage in order to come out into the world. The emotion of fear doesn't enter into it because fear is an intellectual concept. It's a notion of where you can see a perceived threat, but you've got to have an experience in order for that to be recognized in the first place. But nevertheless, well, for many people, we live our life hyper vigilant, waiting for those perceived threats to manifest, and therefore threaten our existence, threaten our way of life, threaten whatever it is. And that's a real piece for so many people, including myself at a certain point in time. But when we understand that fear is information and that it is the stories we tell ourselves, because primarily fear is imagination based. We don't have empirical evidence for a lot of the stories we keep telling ourselves that limit our sense of being, our sense of doing, and ultimately the outcomes that we're looking for in our lives. So the face part becomes a critical first step when you can sit down and look at the stories you tell yourself and ask yourself, are they true? Do I have evidence for them? So is most people are out in the future catastrophizing, worst case scenarios. Life's going to go to shit. Oh, yeah, really? Do you have evidence for that? No, I don't, but I know it's going to happen. Why do you know it's going to happen? Well, in the past, that happened in the past. Yeah, okay, great. Where are you right now? What kind of mentality is driving your thinking and your behavior at this very moment? Is it still the influence of the past that's driving your present? And if that's the case, then yes, your future may very well go to shit simply because you're staying stuck in a pattern that keeps influencing you, not positively and not helpfully either. So we have to start reinventing ourselves and our thinking so that our behavior changes. And that leads you into the explore part of the fear acronym, which is okay, so you've recognized the narrative you're telling yourself. A lot of people have this sense of I'm not good enough. That is number one. I have 4 professional fears that I call out. First one is inadequacy. And anytime you attach the word not to your self-identity, you're generally speaking about fear. I'm not valued. I'm not respected. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not capable. Now, of course, for many of us, there are many, many occasions when we're not capable because we haven't learned enough to be capable. And yet we stick to that sense of, again, I'm not good enough. Self-doubt, self-worth, all of those elements are tied into lack of confidence. If I can stand up and say, I know who I am and I'm taking full responsibility for myself, that's a pretty confident person right there. Doesn't mean I'm always right, because I'm not, but I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong, which when you are dealing with inadequacy, and I had this for a long time, telling people that you're wrong, whoa, what does that say about you? That's really a negative. The fear of failure is tied into the fear of rejection. The rejection piece comes in through judgment and criticism. So if we look at that particular element, how many people are approval driven, who seek validation constantly from other people? Tell me I'm okay. Tell me I'm doing good. And by the way, I'm going to do my damnedest to make you happy, because if I make you happy, then my life is good. I'm safe. And I see that regularly in the clients that I get to work with. This all about the self-worth is tied into, and as one client said recently, my self-worth is tied into how well my client is doing. Okay, so if your client isn't doing well, is that talking about you, or is it talking about the client? Well, it must be something I need to do. And then my own personal life, I was 20 years into my 46-year marriage now before I realized that not every mistake was my fault. It was a two-way street. So it took me 20 years to figure that one out, because up until then, it's like, I've got to make you happy. I've got to keep everything cool. I was all about the approval thing because I needed the validation, because I didn't have the internal piece that said, I'm okay, because that's ultimately it. So rejection, approval, all of that is very, very good. Perfectionism is another piece of that, by the way. High standards, must get it right, because if I don't get it right, somebody's going to criticize me, and I can't have that. Then the next piece of that is uncertainty. And I like to say, as an entrepreneur, everything's uncertain. There are no guarantees on anything. It can all change in a heartbeat. We've all been there and done that. So this is a big piece. Uncertainty, as the Stoics said, is a fundamental aspect of life. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's what the change process is really all about. And the last piece of this is loss, scarcity. How many people are terrified of being impoverished when they get older? Well, let me tell you something. I've been down that road. I know exactly what that looks and feels like, because in 2008, I lost everything in that financial collapse, and I had to start all over again. And that was, 2008. We're in 2026 now. So, it's been a road of up and down, up and down. And a lot of times when you sit there and you go, what are we going to do with the rest of our life? And how are we going to survive? But shit, I ain't stopping. I'm 74 years old. It's like, I'm just getting started. So see how many years life is going to give me to keep going. And that's kind of how I look at it. You take it each day at a time. But the scarcity piece is real. I have a client right now who's hired me simply because he's running a professional business, but he's constantly worried about losing everything. And he realized it was a very unhealthy way of thinking. And so we've been working for the last few months on helping him to understand how to remove that way of thinking out of his life. And so far he's doing good. He's really starting to shift.
So, Jacqueline, I want to ask you, this conversation is so up my alley, so to speak, in terms of the time I spent in digging into taking hold of your emotions and then turning them around and influencing, how I proceed as well as people around me. Thoughts in your head become the events in your life, and also the power of visualization. So tell me about how thoughts and visualization become useful in this exercise of using the fear methodology.
So think about it this way. You've heard the expression thoughts become things. And the thoughts become things because our thinking is really what drives our world. I mean, think about that for a second. Everything in your world evolved out of a thought. I needed a new camera for my computer because I'm on Zoom all day. I had to think about what that looked like. I have, I'm looking around my room here. I've got a pad that I can write on when I take notes for my clients, as opposed to bits of paper that used to accumulate, and who the hell knew what was in that pile. Now it's on a digital, so I can go find things more easily. Everything about your life has been a thought. Your relationships were a thought. Your changes that you made in your life were a thought. The house that you live in was a thought. The children and how you raised them was all about your thinking. Every aspect of our existence comes out of our thinking. And that thinking can be influenced by a multitude of circumstances and people around your life that directs you in a specific way to live the life you're living and be happy with it or not happy with it. And I meet far more unhappy people than I meet happy people. In my workshops on fear intelligence, I have a room full of CEOs, high level CEOs, and I'll say to them, how many of you had a happy childhood? I'd be honest about that, a really happy childhood. And you get a few hands going up, and I go, yeah, okay, let's dissect that. Let's look at it. Was there ever a time when you disappointed a parent? Was there ever a time when you were told that that wasn't good enough? Was there ever a time when you felt like somehow you weren't measuring up to what other people wanted from you? The answer to that is yes, of course. Were you unhappy when that happened? I was. Okay. And what did that do for your self-esteem? Well, it lowered it, didn't it? Because you no longer felt like you could be anything. I mean, the number of people who say, my mother told me I could be anything in the world. And the number of people who grew up in families like mine who said you would never amount to much, yeah, it's probably a greater number than those who were told they can succeed at anything. So when we're impregnated with those types of messages, what does it do to your thinking? It limits you. When you hear negative voices in your head, who's the one doing the talking? I guarantee you who started the conversation in your head, it came from somebody else who had a judgment about you.
Right.
And that judgment becomes your recognized pattern of how you start to see yourself. How many people live according to other people's expectations of what they should be doing in life? I see this regularly in different cultures where the expectation is you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be this and that. And you go through your life being the doctor, being the and then realizing that's not what I wanted. That wasn't really where my passions were leading me, but I had to please my parents. So I'm living my life on my parents' agenda, not on my agenda. Or I'm living my life on, as a woman, on my husband's agenda, not my agenda. And there's a lot of power plays in relationships where there's a lot of subjugation and a lot of not really revealing. And I can go again from experience where you're not really revealing your true personality because of your insecurity, because your lack of self-worth, because your lack of self-esteem. And that shows up in the lack of confidence and the self-doubt and the inability to express yourself with some kind of authority. My work, I talk about learning how to take ownership and authority of self. That's a big ask for a lot of people.
So the thoughts are your fear, right? Your fear is created by the thoughts you have. So how do you move on to the explore part? So is that's a deliberate action, right? So you have to take that action. So you have to identify that you have these thoughts that are making you fear, and then you have to really discredit the fear, right? That's what explore is. Is that right?
This part is about how do you want to change the narrative. So if I go through my life thinking I'm not good enough, if I go through my life thinking that I need approval from others, and I recognize that that's the story that I'm telling myself, that I need your validation in order for me to feel good. Okay. And every time somebody gives me a pat on the back and goes, "You did good. Wow, I feel terrific." Okay. What would it look like? Here's the question. What would it look like if I could do that for myself? There's the explore part. What would it look like if I can actually tell myself you did a good job today? What would it look like if I can look myself in the mirror and say, you know what? You're a pretty decent person. You've done good. Look back over your life. How many people have you taken care of? Like I said to my client yesterday, your job right now is to give yourself the attention You deserve. That was my mantra for her this week. I said, give yourself the attention you deserve, because she's all about giving other people her time, her attention, and making sure that they're getting what they need instead of giving herself what she needs. Now, recognizing that I'm not giving myself the attention I need, that I deserve because I've worked damned hard for it, that then becomes the narrative of how do I change that story? And I'm going to change that story little by little. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens incrementally by having the awareness that says, this isn't really working for me. I want to do it differently. And here's the other thing about all of this work, because I know this to be true also. You don't do this just by reading a book and thinking about it. You do it by having sounding boards like me, who can say to you, that's bullshit, and what would you like to do about it? Which is exactly what I did with my client yesterday. So, I'm well known for being very, very direct with my clients. I don't mess about.
It's called the accountability part.
And it's accountability too. And you need the accountability. If you say you want to change, and you want to change the stories, and you want to change the actions, because stories create action, it's behavior. If you really want to change the behavior, which leads you into the ACT part of the FEAR acronym, the ACT part is about incremental changes on a daily basis. So my instructions yesterday to my client was, take this phrase of giving yourself attention because you deserve it, and post it on your mirror so you can see it, or in your office, or on your computer, where you can see it every single day, because it's a reminder. It's not enough for me to just tell you one time and you're going to remember. No, you're not. You'll go right back into the old bullshit and keep doing what you're doing. So the incremental changes are really about paying attention to where it is that you continue to go to that isn't necessarily serving your best interests. And that's the big awareness piece right there.
So, Jacqueline, how does punishment come?
Punishment doesn't help. This is coming from a woman who was violently punished as a child by my father, who was an alcoholic and a violent man when he had a drink in him. And the punishment, whether it's verbal or physical, emotional, whatever the case may be, is all going to add up to making you feel less than. Your job is not to feel less than. Your job is to feel who you are. Now, notice I'm using the word feel here, because when we are violated, and punishment is a violation of the individual, when we are violated, what do? We retreat. We pull in. It makes you small. Now, you may want to have a reaction and blow back at somebody because of the punishment. But punishment is not something that we're looking for. Most of us want to live our life in reward. We don't want punishment. We want to be rewarded. But what are we rewarding becomes the bigger question. Am I rewarding you for being an asshole in the workplace because you're getting shit done? No, I'm not. Because if I learn that you're an asshole, there's the door. You're out. Because other people are being disrespected. And also when people are feeling threatened, when people are feeling like they're going to be judged, they get silent. And you see this in the workplace all the time. If I feel like I can speak up and I'm given permission to speak up, we have what's called psychological safety. It works. But when I feel like if I speak up, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be punished for putting in my 10 cents worth, I'm going to shut up. And I'm going to go along to get along. And 9 times out of 10, that never works.
So we live, America is the melting pot, right? So many people, different parts of the world, people come from different parts of the world and they bring their culture. So how do you feel about culture playing a role in this? Because some cultures, they don't recognize certain things, right? So I want to share this a quick story of mine. Okay, so I'm Turkish, as I mentioned. Turks, we come from well, not come from directly, but the immediate predecessor was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had one of the largest empires, and Egypt was part of the empire. So, in fact, today, whenever I go to Egypt, they always, and I say I'm Turkish, they always look up to me. They're like the masters, the governor, because we were the governor. There was a governor and everything. So there's close ties. So, and I love scuba diving. So we went on a trip to Egypt, the Red Sea, and we're staying on this resort. And I'm with this friends of mine. It's a group from Brazil. They're all Brazilians. And Brazilians, you know how they are, very easygoing. It's all about fun and enjoy life and everything. So we're going to go on a diving trip. And it takes us to get up at 4 a.m., take a bus, and then take the boat, because the sailing takes about, I don't know, 6 hours. So we asked the hotel to prepare sandwiches for us so that we can pick them up 4 o'clock, just before we leave. Sure enough, 4 a.m., we are downstairs. We go to the reception, said, big resort, huge resort. And so the guy who organized the whole trip, he's there, and nothing is happening. There's one guy behind the counter. And so he comes back, says, well, he doesn't know, and he's asking us to call the guy who's supposed to prepare the sandwiches. And I said, well, it's 4 a.m. So anyway, it's going back and forth, and then somebody else goes, talks to the guy, and the guy is just pushing back. And I said, leave it to me. So I go to the counter, and I said, what's wrong with the sandwiches? He says, they must be ready. It must be in the kitchen or wherever. And he said, so I said, go into the kitchen, get the sandwiches, bring back now. And he said, okay. He turned around, disappeared. 5 minutes later, he came back with the sandwiches. And then I came back, everybody's looking at me. What the hell did you? I said, that's how you speak to the Egyptians. As a Turk. It's a big thing to say, but I'm saying it in a joking way because of the historical relationship between the two nations. That's how the dealing was.
Yeah, but what I also hear is that someone who took charge. I mean, you didn't stand around waiting for somebody else to make up their mind about what was going to happen or not happen. You basically took charge and said, they're in the kitchen, go get the bloody sandwiches and bring them out here. But you're right about the cultural differences. I mean, there are many cultures where you don't speak up to your authority figures, where you
Right.
accept whatever it is that they're saying to you. That's very fear-based in itself, because again, retribution is a real concern for a lot of people. So we can take the cultural issues into consideration, but we're in America. And as you say, it is a melting point, a melting pot, in essence. Right now, it's getting more and more muddied in terms of that
Right.
melting pot. But the point that I'm making here is that there's expectations in this country about who and how you can be, which is why we left these old cultures behind. If I was expected at that time to be a working class girl and always be a working class girl, who would have
Right.
thought, who grew up with ignorance, who grew up with no education per se. I left school at 15 originally, eventually went back to college and got a degree, but there was a long gap in between. I left school at 15, as I said, but the point being is that we leave our old cultures and our old formats behind when we're in America. And so I speak to the Western point of view around
Right.
all of this, but I can also appreciate the circumstances of culture. I mean, I had one Indian client who said to me, it's real hard to push back against the culture because you're going to upset your parents. You're going to make them unhappy because you're not going along with their plan for you. I mean, talk about like arranged marriages, for instance. Thank God a lot of those days are over. But what to your point about the Ottoman Empire, it was a brutal empire. I mean, these Ottomans didn't think twice about cutting off your head if they thought it was going to make a difference, you know. So there's a history of brutality in every single culture, no question. The British were just as bad in India and other places. So, you know, we look back on it right now, and we're no longer part of that. It is a history. But for you as an individual, you're in a situation of choice at this point in time, because we're always in choice. What are you choosing to believe? What are you choosing to think? How are you choosing to behave? And how are you choosing to build the relationships? Because we're human beings. We're all in relationships to something or someone. And how do you manage that within your life? It's complicated, no question about it. And I'm trying to simplify it down to these are the fundamentals that make a difference in life. And it is the most powerful emotion we have outside of maybe love is fear.
Yeah.
Because fear and love are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. I mean, it's they are connected, and you have to acknowledge. So the bottom line message. There's one more thing that I want to incorporate into this discussion. Yeah. So rewarding the right behavior is what you're advocating for, rather than punishing. And into that context, you also want to put a little bit of the effect of the culture, because that is always there. And I'd like to know your thoughts on this new work environment we have now. Yes, we are in America now, it's a Western society, but it's also a remote workforce. It employs people from all corners of the world. So now tell me your thoughts about how do you manage this when you are applying this reward
So I'll
mechanism?
tell you, I've got 3 people who work for me. One is in Pakistan, one is in Nigeria, and one is in the Philippines. Okay. So I have an international workforce that is
Right.
my team. Now, what they're specialized in is not my specialty. I hire them because they have skills that I don't even want to learn, frankly.
Right.
And they're excellent at it, every single one of them. Now, how does that impact their culture and the work that they're doing with me? It doesn't. It doesn't, because it has a much more universal tone to it. So, for instance, the guy in Pakistan, he builds out all of my websites and my backends on my CRM system. I use a system called Go High Level. You've probably heard of it. It's fairly complicated. It's a marketing and CRM system, and it's complicated. I don't want to learn it. I give it to him to do because he's an expert at it. The guy in Nigeria handles all my email stuff and setting up so that my clients get the programs that they need, again, through my Go High Level platform. And the woman in the Philippines does all my graphic design as well as some of my social media stuff. So again, they all have expertise that is outside of their culture per se. So we're just dealing with skills. And when you talk about remote workers, the biggest problem with remote workers is isolation.
Right.
Isolation is the biggest challenge for remote workers. And we see that. Now, I know a lot of people who do not want to go back into the office on a daily basis. They'll go back into the office for a couple of days a week. One of my children is in that particular stage. And they're perfectly happy working with their team members who are mostly Eastern European, and they work for a very big tech firm. So they're happy working at home. And it helps because they're a parent and they've got time to manage the child as well. I have another child who lives in England who also is in software, and he would much rather remote work to some degree, but likes the connection to go into the office and see people. So there is that community piece that is important. But to your point, remote work around the world these days, apart from the time differences, which can be a pain in the ass because you're on a call at 5 in the morning instead of, or 10 o'clock at night, as the case may be. Um, it's a time difference, but generally speaking, we're talking skills here. We're not talking culture. We're not talking culture.
Okay, so the last piece of the fear framework is right. So let's talk about that.
So whenever you're going to have any changes in your life, you have to meet it with courage, because the opposite of fear is courage. It's the ability to say, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to push through whatever it is. So let's say it's somebody who spends their life not speaking up. Say somebody who wants to make presentations. I do them all the time. I'm perfectly happy in front of an audience. I can talk all day. But there are many people who it's like their worst nightmare. I think it was Jerry Seinfeld who said more people would be happy going into a pine box than standing up in front of a crowded room and talking to them. And why? Because we're afraid of judgment and criticism, people thinking about what we're saying. We worry too much about what other people are thinking, by the way. And what I like to say is what other people are thinking is none of your business, because you can't get in their heads. And 9 times out of 10, they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves, because we're very self-centered creatures. And so that's kind of how it goes. But we spend a great deal of time worrying about what other people are thinking and going to say. So we work around that. So having the courage to speak up and say what it is that you're thinking, the courage to challenge somebody, have the courage to step into a difficult situation. That's a rise piece right there. So you're meeting the challenge, whatever that challenge might be. And when we rise with courage and conviction, our confidence rises too. So
Right,
there's the 3 C's. You've got the courage, the conviction, and the confidence. Those three together allow you to take greater ownership and authority of you, not anything else, just you. Because when you show up real, when you show up as yourself, you get a whole lot more respect. You get a whole lot more of people going, I like you, because you say what you mean and you mean what you say. And that's an unusual trait in this day, where people tend to couch the language around what people will find acceptable.
right,
The word nice, when I'm being nice to somebody, means being socially acceptable. Who wants to go through their life being nice? You could be
right.
a good person, but you don't have to be a good person at the sacrifice of yourself for other people. Did that for a long time. Now I'm like, hell no. If you like it, it's great. If you don't like it, that's okay too. There's plenty of other people that will help you out. Go ahead.
I want to tell you a quick story, which is the perfect example of this rise. It's a comedy piece. It's fiction, but it makes the point. So there's this company, and the president is about to sign a huge deal with a company. It's been a long time and working it, and it's at the final stage. There is a very important signature that needs to be obtained. It's a matter of procedure. It's not a decision. It's a procedure. It's the red tape that the other company has, and it has to be dealt with as part of the red tape by the people. Not anybody powerful, just those who get things done. They just need to be able to get it done, and it's taking days, goes into weeks, and the president is getting impatient and says, "What's going on? What's taking so long? We already agreed. This just we need to go to implementation." And they said, "Well, we tried. We sent 3 people, and they're all, oh my God, this is just ridiculous." He says, "Go get me John." I said, "John who?" "Well, John Smith, who works." "Yeah, but he works in the mailroom part time, and also he's a janitor the rest of the time. Why do you want to send him? He'll get it done." So they give him the job, send him off. The same day in the afternoon, John comes back with all papers signed. And they said, "How the hell did you do it?" He says, well, first of all, this is not my job, and I was given this job. This is a huge honor for me. I can't just show up as I usually do here, at work in the mailroom and cleaning places. So I had to go first, get my suit dry cleaned, got a new shirt, a new tie, put on my stuff, and I borrowed a briefcase from my friend. I put the papers in it neatly, and I just went, presented myself, and I said I would like an appointment, and it's an urgent matter. I would appreciate very much if it was this afternoon. And they immediately granted me. I had to wait a little bit, but finally they were able to see me, and I took my briefcase and I opened it up and presented the papers, and I asked, would it be okay if I waited? And they said, sure, just wait outside. It will be ready in 15 minutes. And there it is.
Yeah.
So he rose to the occasion, right?
Well, he rose to the occasion. And not only that, it just goes to show that, if you want a job done, you don't need to have it done by the most qualified person in the room either.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. And he obviously, he created an impression, that people knew him. And the president of all people, he knew that this guy existed and he would get the job.
Well, he knew that his performance of being consistent. He was a good janitor,
Yeah.
a good male person, blah blah blah. So give it to the most reliable person in the room, and that was him at that point in time. Which also brings up the trust issues. It's like, I don't trust you executives to actually fulfill this because you're too busy thinking about all the angles of how it's going to go wrong. And it's something I talk about in my work too. In fact, one of the questions I ask them is, what decision are you avoiding right now?
Right,
And that is a massive question to an executive, and it's an interesting thing in a workshop, because when they're asked that question, they then have to look at, if this is a decision you're avoiding, what's the fear behind it, and what is it costing you? And that becomes another big part of it. So, yeah, I mean, again, there are so many ramifications and permutations of this in terms of how we see it. But every time you meet a challenge, you are rising. Every
Right.
time you inch by inch decide, this isn't working, I need to do something else, and you make the change, or you make the effort to change, and you don't give up. I like to say this to my clients. I did martial arts for years, and I used to say there were times in my training when I would see a wall in front of me because I was exhausted. My teacher would say, again, again, again. I did a lot of my martial arts in France, so he would say, encore, encore, again, again. So off I would go, and that wall would show up, and I would go, okay, you're either going to go over it, under, around it, or through it, but you do not ever allow that wall to stop you.
Right.
Rise right there.
Yeah, exactly. So this is so powerful, Jacqueline. I want to summarize our conversation, and you tell me if I'm doing justice to this. So face is the first one of the fear framework. Face means that listen to your fear and ask what it's telling you, and face the fear. The second one is explore that fear with the intention to change the narrative. In other words, what if what your fear is telling you didn't happen? What if you weren't afraid? What would that look like? What would happen? So that's the exploring part. And then, now that you know what it would look like if you weren't afraid, take action, act, but not one big action, but incremental actions. Take small steps to change that behavior of having that fear dictate how you're gonna behave. Instead, small. And then finally, whatever that action is going to be, it may be a big step. Even though you want to take smaller, sometimes there may need to be big steps. Then rise to the occasion. See it as an opportunity to shine, not as a challenge to stop you. but see it as an opportunity to make an example of a success.
Absolutely. You have nailed every single one of them. It all sounds great. Yeah. And
I
if
wanna
we
I wanna tell you this, as you were talking about the explore part. I'm sure you know about this book. It's a tiny little book. In fact, I was on a plane from New York to St. Louis, however long that flight is. I read it during that flight. Who moved my cheese?
It's very classic. It's a classic one. It's about changing careers. Yes.
Well, I always bring up that book. The reason is because after reading that book, I have to say I'm not a very good reader because my mind is always racing, and but I was able to read that book, and by the time I finished reading, something almost, those ice bucket challenges, like they pour they used to, so it was almost like I was awakened by something like that. One line out of that book did it for me. You know what that line is? Remember in that book, the two mice, they are going through the tunnel, and one is afraid and it doesn't want to move further, and they are gonna starve, and the other mouse turns to him and says, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?"
Yes. Yeah.
That changes everything. So I now tell people, okay, what's going on? Oh, this is happening. Okay, just think about what you would do if you weren't afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what your explorer is suggesting.
Absolutely. And if you ask the question, what would you do if you were not afraid?
Yeah,
Then if you can step outside of your fear-based thinking, then you can create a much wider universe of possibilities than you are currently doing. Because again, when we live our life in limitation and we put our blinkers on, or our there's a blockage there, you're only seeing what you think you need to see. But when you remove that, and I always say a lot of my work is not about giving you the answers, it's about asking you the hard questions that allow
right.
you to find the answers
Exactly.
of what you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. So, great conversation, Jacqueline. What I want to know before I let you go is I want to know that little girl in Scotland who said, "I'm not doing this. I'm going to pursue something else." What gave you that mindset?
I've always been a dreamer. And even in my worst moments in life, I would dream about becoming a writer. I would dream about becoming a singer. I would dream about a life that was way beyond anything that I could possibly perceive of in my immediate environment. I would go uptown to the shishi department store and stand and look at the windows with all these mannequins with all these elegant clothes on, and I would dream about one day I would be wearing those. And I have fulfilled all of that in my lifetime. But there was a long road between then and that happening, where there was an awful lot of messed up stuff that took place before I finally was able to accumulate those goals of mine.
So, that dreaming capability, did you have any other dreamers around you? Where did that come from?
Books, books. We didn't have books in the house, so I used to steal books from the library or from school. And we had a neighbor who worked in a bookbinding company who knew I loved books, and she would steal books from her bookbinding company and give them to me. So books were really my way of escaping from the reality, the harsh reality of what I was actually living in. And I books have always been, you can tell, books have always been an
Yeah.
extraordinary part of my life. And this is just a fraction of the books that I've had in my life. I've had thousands and thousands of books that have passed through my hands. And it's through books that I learned how to really evolve myself. That and people, by the way, because as I said earlier, You can't do this work on your own. You need
No,
people who are going to help you be the mirror for you, but also hold you accountable for what you say you want. And when you equivocate from that, when you want to pull back from that, you've got good people on your side who can say, hold on a minute, let's walk this through. Let's figure out how you can do the changes you want. Because change is always going to be met with resistance. That's just
sure.
the way it is. And so, if we understand that resistance will show its ugly little head, and we can work with that resistance, that's where the rise comes in. The rise is like, yeah, I know I'm stalling, but I'm going to
Yeah.
fight.
Well, I mean, it's yeah, it's that's the nature of doing something different than what you do every day. So the books part, who directed you to books when you have those challenges at home?
Myself. I always knew that there was a world way beyond anything that I was experiencing growing up in Scotland. And I was always the smartest kid in the room, except I never realized that I was the smartest kid in the room because an example is I took a science test one day, and the teacher called me out because I'm ADHD. I'd be sitting in the back of the room chatting away, doing whatever it was to distract myself from what they were supposed to be teaching me. And I aced this science test, and the woman accused me of cheating, which I did not. It was, for me, there's so much. I've been born with a lot of common sense. They say that about Scots. You're very common, practical people, common sense people. But for me, it was so obvious the stuff that I was learning that there was no real need for me to truly engage in a difficult way. So, but when she accused me of lying, I went ballistic on her, and that didn't end so well. I was almost expelled from school for that reason.
Well, well, what I want to know is your parents. You mentioned your father had a difficult relationship, and he was. And how about your mother? Didn't you get the direction and guidance to cultivate your dreaming
I
capability?
have to tell you, Nick, I could spend a whole episode talking about my family history. But no, my mother had a very tragic history herself. We had three children in the family, and the youngest one was severely what we call retarded back in the 1950s. And so her attention was taken up with this child. So there wasn't a whole lot of leftover in terms of love, and nobody ever mentioned the word love in my family. Nobody says I love you ever. You never got that sense that you really you wanted to belong there. And I think that was another big theme of my life. It's always looking for a place to belong. And I think the fact that I ended up in America was part of that, looking for a place to belong. And that haunted me for a lot of decades, to, finally be in a comfortable place where I go, again, all the work I've done, and I like to say to my clients, there's nothing you can bring me that I haven't personally been involved in.
Right.
I know all this thinking and behavior stuff. This is what I used to do. And now I'm of an age where I can look back on it and go, well, thank God those days are over, because I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I don't shy away from all out there anymore. Even with high level CEOs, like I had a group of multi-million dollar CEOs the other week there, and they said, well, you've got 2 hours to do your presentation. This is what the advice I got before I got in the room. And I looked at them all and I went, I hear you giving me about 2 hours. Well, good luck with that.
Well, I bet that line itself got you hired.
It got their attention right away. And then at the end of the 2 hours, I was like, well, the 2 hours are up, but I'm not done yet. Am I okay with another half an hour? And they all went, oh, yeah, absolutely.
This reminds me of this story. Do you know who John Kasich is?
Yeah, yeah,
Former governor of
right,
Ohio, and
right.
but he was in the Congress. So he wrote a letter to Richard Nixon when he was a high school kid. he wrote a letter, and he wanted to see him for 30 minutes. He hears back from the White House. He's so excited. He goes to Washington, D.C., and they tell him, okay, wait here, the president will see you. He was there the whole afternoon, not because he wanted to stay. I mean, he loved, obviously, the experience, but the president wouldn't let him go.
Because he kept asking good questions and Nixon kept
Yes,
responding.
exactly.
I mean, that's really what it is, you know.
Yeah.
When you bring your whole personality into a situation, and provided that personality really has something to offer, not just
Right.
because you've got a big personality, but
Right.
you've got something to offer, it will engage people. People will want to know more. People will want to know who you are. I mean, it's the reason why we're having this conversation today. You want to know a little bit more about who I am and what matters to me, and why this piece that I'm talking about is so important, because it is a fundamental emotion that is driving most people off the rails. And my job in life now is, and this is my mission very clearly, is I want to educate you on the fact that you can take a different approach to this powerful emotion. And there's no one else out in the world doing it the way I'm doing it. And nobody's calling it fear intelligence. I'm the only one who's using that term.
I've never heard. So there is one person that I heard that played a role in at least empowering you, somehow facilitating, maybe, is that neighbor of yours, by getting books. That was your field, right?
That was one of them. I've had a lot of people in my life who stepped in at the right moment. And that's another thing. If you look back on your life, you can see strategic individuals who showed up at certain times, who said to you, don't go that way, go this way. And you take their advice and you go down that road. And when you go down that road, things open up. So I can think of right off the top of my head, there's at least a dozen people who were instrumental in saying to me, you are so much more than you think you are.
Right.
And I want to help you. And that's the paying it forward. I do this with people who can't afford my services, but I'm happy to prorate it and work with them anyway, because if I can help one person, and this is how it works, if you can help one person make significant changes in their life, they will go on to help 10 more. That's how it works. It's a domino effect.
Well, I mean, that's a line from Schindler's List. Remember at the very end, he's like panicking. He says he's all regretful. I could have done this. Why did I need this? He takes off his watch and said, I didn't know. Why did I need this watch? This would have. And he says, stop. Look how many people, one life alone impacts. So it's so true. Thank you, Jacqueline. I love the conversation. And I'm sure that people will find a huge value in this. So share with us, how can people reach you?
So if you go to fearintelligence.co, there's a something on there that I think you would find interesting. I have two assessments. One is called the executive assessment. This is for people who are key executives, CEOs, people who are in organizations, that shows you what the fear patterns are that are operating within your organization. The other one is for individuals, which shows you where in your life you could be thinking about making some changes through different categories of how fear might be playing out in your life. And both of those are available on my website, fearintelligence.co. So, and they're free. Then people can go take those. That would be one way of getting in touch. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn regularly, and I have a newsletter on there called Fearlessly Speaking. So there's a lot more where this came from, and I never stop thinking about what more can I create, and it's wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Great conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nick. My pleasure.
Thank you. And this brings us to the end of this episode. I'll see you on the next one.
Audacity of Entrepreneurs podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.